Okay.
Well, welcome everyone. Very nice to be with you today. I'm Christopher Hromalik, and today just want to go over, well, the name of this presentation is Weathering the Storm, Practical Strategies for Emergency Remote Instruction. The idea is that we know that emergencies happen. We know that things happen that we can't always plan for. Things such as snow days. Maybe we have some sort of doctor's appointment, some sort of personal emergency. Maybe we're going to a conference, some sort of unforeseen circumstances potentially, but also things that we can plan ahead for as well. Um, this is where we can continue. This is where we can think about what would be ways that we can prepare very quickly in order to very quickly move online, thinking about emergency remote instruction. What are some very minor changes we can make in order to move to a synchronous online environment or to an asynchronous online environment? And also then some ways that we can then think a little more proactively and plan a little bit more through our objectives and our assessments, and then into how we're going to prepare our lessons. So basically, yeah, we're going to be thinking about emergency preparedness, and then also thinking about just some practical strategies in case there are disruptions of some sort. As we know, the image on the screen right now is of a shovel that is practically buried in snow, but we have kind of a walkway that's cleared. As many of us know, there were some days when classes were moved online as a result of snow this year, and well, we know this is not unusual for upstate New York. So, in terms of our goals and objectives, the general overall instructional goal for today is having you think about developing a basic plan for preparing for future emergencies. And by the end of the session today, you should be able to compare and contrast synchronous and asynchronous delivery methods and create a quick lesson, time permitting, based on an existing face-to-face lesson that can be used in either a synchronous or an asynchronous online teaching situation. So as many of us know, it's oftentimes happens that emergencies come up or things come up where we may need to make changes to our instruction. And maybe we need to cancel a class session, or maybe even just to change the way we're delivering our class session. That could be because of a snow day, maybe an appointment or an emergency. Many of us travel if as faculty will travel for conferences or research. And maybe the first option might be to cancel the class session, but it's possible that we may not be able to afford to cancel it. That could be lost time in the classroom for many of us. There may be situations where, for some individuals, it could affect pay, if that's possible. I know that was a situation at an institution where I was before, and so that is something that could potentially affect whether or not you'd want to decide to cancel class or not. And so this is where this quick shift to online instruction is what we're going to be talking about today, and how we can then move to either a synchronous or an asynchronous online environment. So what we're going to cover today, and this is a highly ambitious plan. I do not think we're going to get through this in the next 45 minutes, especially if I were to pause and do any sort of discussions at all. But the idea is, first I want to start off by comparing online modalities, just some very basic pros and cons of each. What are going to be the overall affordances of each of them, but also what are some of the challenges that are faced when working in either synchronous or asynchronous environments. I'll then start off with a very quick how we can quickly change an existing lesson. This is basically just if we find out there's a snow day and you have to go online and teach in 45 minutes. What are some of the very quick things we can do to an existing lesson, especially when we're thinking synchronous online instruction? What are some quick things we can do? What are some quick things we can do if we have maybe just a little more time to create an asynchronous lesson online? Again, the focus is on quick. This is not really going to be getting into a deep dive of an instructional design framework in terms of the quick changes. We'll then look at how we can then take it to that next level where maybe we have a little more time. We want to think through this a little bit more. We can think about backward design. This is a instructional design model that can very quickly help us to be able to think through objectives, assessments, and then planning the class session itself, planning how we're going to deliver the instruction. So that would be another way that we can kind of quickly move into a more purposeful design of our instruction. And then we'll, if time permitting, which I don't think we'll get to this last piece, but I've put together slides on it just in case, thinking next level in backward design in the sense of taking each of the three steps of backward design, and then within each of those three steps, thinking about a model or a framework that we can use to guide us in each of those three steps of backward design. And so that's kind of the next level piece of that, where to go with that. Thinking about ABCDs of learning objectives, thinking about formative versus summative assessment, and then also thinking about something called Guyanese 9 events as part of planning our lessons. Again, that's if there's time. My guess is maybe not. That could be for a future session, potentially. And then taking some time for Q&A at the end, if questions are available. Okay, so real quick, just wanted to take a few minutes to go over synchronous versus asynchronous. I imagine many of us are familiar with these two main modes of delivery for online instruction. We're thinking about fully online instruction, or we're thinking about how we're delivering a class session. This is a very quick comparison, make sure we're all on the same page before moving on. Many of us are very familiar with synchronous online instruction, delivered over Zoom, delivered over Teams. The idea of a live lecture discussion, well, quite frankly, that's what we're doing right now, is a Zoom session where working synchronously, working together at the same time. So if we're going to be delivering an online lesson of some sort, they'll be delivered synchronously. If we're going to be doing that over Zoom or Teams or Google Meet, for example. Whereas asynchronous, this is going to be taking place at a different period of time. You're not necessarily going to be working together in real time. Typically, you'll have content that's created in a learning management system such as Brightspace. You'll have things like videos and readings and images, and typically, when not done in an emergency session, it's going to be much more purposefully designed. Things such as discussion forums and assignments that you might give as part of your asynchronous online instruction. Again, there are many ways that these can be blended, where you have a synchronous session and then there's asynchronous instruction afterwards, asynchronous assignments that are submitted afterwards, or maybe there's some sort of discussion that takes place outside of the synchronous environment. But again, I'll get a little bit into that, but not really going to get too much into how we purposely blend instruction. But of course, you can imagine both have a place in an emergency. So let's think about which ones we could be using in different situations, and then think about how we can go about doing this. So thinking about synchronous online instruction, thinking about some of the unique affordances and maybe some of the challenges that we encounter in synchronous online instruction. Many of us experience a lot of this, especially if we were teaching during the COVID-19 lockdown. Then we were oftentimes many of us participated in emergency remote teaching. There was a seminal article back in March 2020, Chuck Hodges and gosh, I can't remember who all were the authors on that. It was an EDUCAUSE review article explaining the difference between emergency remote teaching, emergency remote instruction, and purposely designing an online course. And basically, a great article that explains the idea that at that time, what we were taking part in was emergency remote instruction in response to a crisis situation. This was us. Yep, and excellent. Yep, Teresa's saying here the student definitions of modality. Excellent, excellent. And so what we were taking part in was more emergency remote instruction as opposed to purposely designing our online instruction. But there were certain things that we could take advantage of at that time that were part of some of the unique affordances of synchronous online instruction. Real-time discussion, spontaneous communication. So these types of things can take place in a synchronous environment. Formative assessment is very good for we can have lots of formative assessment. In other words, assessment for learning as opposed to assessment of learning. The idea that we're able to provide feedback, help to shape the learner, be able to form the learner as part of formative assessment. If we have questions that come in, we can answer those questions live and in the moment typically. And so we can have more immediate responses. And live activities, assignments that take place in the live synchronous environment, participation checks, polls, etc. But of course, there are some limitations, and these are what we want to be thinking about, and especially addressing as we're thinking about how we can very quickly move into some of these more emergency remote instruction situations for snow days or other emergencies. Challenges for students with limited internet access and technical issues. This can happen, of course, with asynchronous instruction too, but synchronous instruction, we oftentimes are very well aware of this because they tend to happen in the moment and they're right in front of us. But there can be some challenges. Limited access, especially if we have a lot of video going on, that can be a challenge sometimes. One of the big concerns can be high cognitive load, a lot of things happening all at once. We may have a PowerPoint that we're sharing on a screen while also explaining the PowerPoint, while also having questions going on in the chat. When we couple that with potentially the difficulties in navigating technology, then that can be even more challenging for many students, even if they do have experience in the online environment, such as Zoom or Teams or what have you. As we know, it's difficult to sustain interest as well. So that's going to be a piece we'll really focus on as part of these quick changes to moving online. How can we sustain interest so it isn't just going to be 55 or 75 minutes or a basically lecture? What are some quick things we can put together to sustain interest and be able to keep students interested? And of course, challenges to providing access to students with disabilities as well. We want to make sure that if we are going to be providing our synchronous online instruction to students, we want to make sure that there are just some basic things that we can do to help to ensure access to students with disabilities that will then think about this through a UDL lens, will then also help us to be able to create a better instructional experience for any of our learners. And so comparing that then to asynchronous online instruction, and this is just, oh, excellent. And I'm seeing, Teresa, thank you. I'm seeing a couple of things coming through. Difference between online instruction versus emergency rooms. Yes, excellent, excellent. Sounds good. Thank you, Teresa. I appreciate you sharing that. Um, yes, so asynchronous online, some unique opportunities. There is flexibility, access anywhere, anytime, but also self-paced. It can be self-paced at not all asynchronous online courses self-paced. As an example, we're offering through the UDL SUNY program right now, we're offering a self-paced intro to UDL course. You can start that anytime, take it anytime. But what I mean by self-paced is within the deadlines that are set. You have that opportunity to not necessarily have to be there at that specific time. You can then take your time to revisit content as needed to be able to then better understand it. If you have a video, you can play it multiple times. You can go back and scrub through pieces of the video to be able to better understand the content as needed. And for many students, it's very helpful to have that time for reflection, that time to be able to process the information too. And speaking of reflection, that's a big, great thing to be adding into an asynchronous, very quickly that you can add into the end of this emergency room instruction is just an actual prompt for reflection, to be able to reflect on what's been learned. 3, 2, 1. 3 things that you learned, 2 ways you can apply this to your personal or professional life, and then 1 question you still have. A great way to get to just prompt students to reflect on what they've been learning. And of course, lots of multimedia images, text, video. We don't have to present anything in just one way. And of course, synchronous online instruction, we have the multimedia is also an important piece of it. But especially when we think about our asynchronous online instruction, including multimedia, multiple means of representation. If we design multiple means of representation, having more than one way of explaining something, potentially having text and maybe an image that can help to make for a better explanation of it, providing a video with closed captions and or a transcript, being able to present content using multimedia, but also students themselves can turn in assignments using multimedia as well. Written assignments, video assignments, audio assignments, etc. So lots of multimedia uses, of course. But there are some limitations, some things we want to consider and keep in mind. Immediate feedback, not the same way as in a synchronous online environment. There isn't that immediate interaction either. There is going to be more of a delay, hence the name asynchronous. And so there is that delay in terms of time of when things take place when we're working with our instructors, our students. It is up to students to be responsible for their self-regulation, their motivation, their time management. These are things we can try to prompt students for. And that's also a great thing to add into your courses as you get more into teaching online, is to be able to prompt for self-regulated learning behavior. But at the same time, that is something that students themselves are responsible for doing, managing their own time, sustaining effort to reach their goals, stay motivated, um, and self-regulation, self-directing their learning. There can be barriers related to technology as well. So again, things like access, experience with technology, um, driving through different parts of even upstate New York, internet connections can vary as you drive from one place to another. So whether or not large videos can be accessed as easily as text-based instruction, for example. And of course, it can be a heavier instructor workload. Anyone who's taught online knows that it takes time to build the course. If we're doing it right, it takes a lot of it does take time. If we're doing it right, it takes time to correct the assignments too. It is like delivering um, a, a, a heavier course load, basically, for lack of a better way to put it. So when we're thinking about how we can leverage each of these, one of the things I might start off with is just quick changes. What do we do if we have, let's say, um, we have a half hour and we need to make a quick change to our lesson? What are going to be some of the things we can do? So think about quick changes, starting with quick changes to a synchronous session. Um, the basic thing to do is start with your existing lesson, um, and then share your connection instructions with students, and then make minor adjustments to the lesson. So if we're thinking we have very little time, these are going to be the quick things that we're going to be able to do in order to get our class session up and online for synchronous instruction. So you might take this approach if you, again, have very little time, but also if you're available during the class time. So an example might be if we have a snow day and we're moved online, but also maybe you're traveling for a conference or research and you don't want to lose that instructional time. So I've placed on here, oops, there are some places where I didn't get rid of the copyright 2024. So that's the QR code that's on here. We'll be sharing connection instructions by announcement or an email. These are some Zoom instructions that are put together by Douglas Hemphill of the instructional design team from the Division of Extended Learning, in collaboration with the members of the ID team. But thank you, Doug, for putting all this together for us. There's a fantastic document here where you can follow Zoom instructions. There's a QR code. And there's also, I created a bit.ly link to be able to very quickly direct you to there. It's bit.ly / and then there's all caps OSW hyphen ZOOM hyphen ERT. So this would be it's from the knowledge base here at SUNY Oswego, with instructions on how to set up your Zoom room, basically, if you've never really done this before, and it really goes step by step through it quite well. And at the end, there's information on how you can share this Zoom room information with students, how you can email it to your entire class. So very important that after you set up the Zoom room, to be careful to communicate this to students with very clear, concise instructions on how to log on and what that Zoom room information is. So again, we wouldn't want to forget to email the link to the class. And again, that's all at the end of these Zoom instructions that Doug has very kindly put together for us. And you can email it to students, but also again, announcement in Brightspace is also a great way to make sure that gets emailed out to everyone. And so that information will be right there in Brightspace as well. But then just quick changes, just adjusting some minor things. If we're thinking about focusing the lesson, one of the big pieces is when we're teaching synchronously online, sometimes we may not be able to get through as much content as when we're going to be in a face-to-face classroom. So focusing the lesson on the key points, what students need in order to reach the objectives for the day. When we're thinking about one of the challenges of synchronous online instruction, is the idea of sustaining interest in the lesson. So teaching in chunks, 10, 15-minute chunks, and including some interaction along the way. And this is where if we're trying to really quickly move online, what are some quick things that we can do to sustain interaction? Or excuse me, to include interaction, I should say, and sustain interest. One might be thinking 10 to 15 minutes of instruction, and then maybe a 2-minute question or a 2-minute poll in the chat. It might mean teaching 10 to 15 minutes, and then maybe having a 5-minute discussion question in breakout rooms. So this idea of thinking in terms of 10 to 15-minute chunks with some sort of interaction or some way to work together. And then if we think about cognitive load, this is where adding in some basic informations, such as what I've been doing right now with the PowerPoint, adding in like a dissolve in or peer to the PowerPoint, so the information comes in little by little in order to help with cognitive load. One thing I've not been doing as well in this presentation, I'm realizing as I'm presenting, is that oftentimes I like to, when I'm presenting, to pause for 3 to 4 seconds after having the animations dissolve in. Part of this is thinking about it in terms of accessibility. If there's a student, for example, who is working with an interpreter, if we have a student who's deaf or hard of hearing working with an interpreter, to be able to then focus on both the interpreter and the PowerPoint presentation at the same time is really not possible. And so in having the animation come in, pausing for a few seconds to allow everyone to read it, and then someone who is working with an interpreter can then focus their attention on the interpreter after that is a good strategy in order to help with cognitive load as well too. And when thinking about accessibility, very quick mention to teach students to turn on captions, for example, but also describing visuals aloud. If there is a visual, especially if that visual is essential to understanding the information that's being presented, then to describe that visual aloud as opposed to saying, you can see that here in this image. Actually describe that image and describe what's taking place in that image helps everybody in the room. It will provide access to individuals who are blind or have low vision, but then every student who is in the room will then have access to that information and know what is the most salient and important. It makes salient the most important information of that image. So in the interest of teaching in chunks and providing kind of like a 2-minute question, you're welcome to respond in the chat or unmute and respond aloud. I'd just be curious, because we have different disciplines that are here today, what might be a quick 2-minute question you can ask in your discipline? An example of the type of question you could ask is, well, just that. I'm asking right now, a quick 2-minute question that you could ask in your discipline. 10 to 15 minutes of 15 minutes probably of instruction right now, and a little quick 2-minute question to think about. What would be a 2-minute question you could ask in a course that you teach in your discipline, or a course that you teach, or some sort of workshop that you presented? In the chat, or of course, you're welcome to unmute and respond aloud. What is a 2-minute question you could ask in your discipline? Of course, the worst part of doing this sort of thing is the waiting.
I think
It's agonizing. Jessica?
I was going to say in my health promotion program planning class, it would be having a discussion or a question about any previous experience maybe they've had with any type of program planning, to see what types of things they've been involved with, open that up for discussion. I tend to like to do that in the beginning of classes too, to kind of see where they're at foundationally.
Love that. Yep. And looking at the time, probably not going to get into Gagne's 9 events in this workshop at all today. But what the first of Gagne's 9 events is to gain attention. And so what you're describing, Jessica, is exactly that. It's you can use this as kind of a 2-minute question in the middle of the lesson, but what you're describing at the beginning of the lesson, something that you just gain their attention. Because if we think about how we learn, we're not, especially if we're thinking of it from a cognitive perspective, that yes, exactly. Doug's saying describe cognitivism, exactly. So great minds think alike, Doug. That think about it from a cognitive perspective. We're not going to be able to learn if we don't pay attention to it. And so gaining students' attention in the first place with a question like that, what's your prior experience? What experience do you have with something that we're going to be talking about today? Gains attention also starts to think about a little bit of prior knowledge and prior experience too, which is also essential for learning from a cognitive perspective as well too. Shelley writes in the text in the chat here. In my stress class, how do you manage stress? Love it. I love it. Excellent. So we have a discussion about stress and talking about what stress is and that sort of thing. Maybe even we provided some ideas of stress, and then asking, how do you manage stress? I love that because that really gets students involved. Oh, I love Shelley's writing. What areas of your life do you have a growth or fixed? Like, excellent. So it says here, what areas of your life do you have a growth or fixed mindset? Love that. Love that. And it personalizes it too. And so if we have this online session where a lot of times we're struggling to be able to sustain interest, it then personalizes it. And what I love, Shelley, what you're bringing up too, is that these are both. Oh, and Doug is saying here to describe cognitivism. Exactly, exactly. So, so you have this question, and Doug is saying too, this is a question now where here's what we've been teaching so far. Let's go back and describe this a little bit better. And Teresa's saying, tell us about the process you follow to help you determine your personal values. GST 104. Yep. Love that. Exactly. Exactly. So we have something, especially we have some of these things that are either checks on knowledge or in many cases personalizing some of the things that we're talking about here in our synchronous online session. And some of these could be 2-minute questions that are done in chat or done aloud, or they could be 5-minute discussion questions for breakout rooms. I'm looking at Shelley's second question. What areas of life do you have a growth or fixed mindset? This could easily be a 5-minute breakout room discussion question where you discuss back and forth and then compile all the ideas together, and then a reporter can share back to the rest of the class some of the ways that their group has a growth or fixed mindset, or ways that their group manages stress. It could be a group response to what cognitivism is, or a group response to the process followed to help determine personal values. So yeah, there could be a 2-minute question or a 5-minute breakout room. So yeah, something like these just to be able to very quickly, once we have the Zoom room put together, shared out to students, then we take a lesson that exists, especially a PowerPoint presentation, add in a few animations just to reduce cognitive load, and then put in some natural breaks where we can have a 2-minute question or a 5-minute breakout room question. And if we're in a hurry, that's what we can put together. Asynchronous, if we're thinking about quick changes, this is where it might be a little more time necessary to put together an asynchronous session, but there may be some reasons why we need to put this together in a hurry in order to continue the instruction. So with asynchronous, typically we want to just make quick changes. We know we have a lesson that we're already going to be putting together, but some sort of emergency comes up. We'll typically then do this work within Brightspace. We'll want to make sure we're presenting content, so some sort of reading, video, etc. We'll then create a basic assignment or two of some sort, and then post announcement to students. Again, this is quick changes, things that we want to just get together as quickly as possible. But some of the quick changes, when we might take this approach, we might have very little time to prep, and we may or may not be available during the class time session as well. So an example, this might be that there's a last-minute doctor appointment that comes up, and instead of being able to provide a face-to-face classroom experience, then we're going to be moving it very quickly online to not lose that instructional time. Maybe you're traveling to a conference and you're traveling tomorrow, and so you want to do this rather quickly to be able to get something together while you're on the plane. Your students are going to be able to continue the work, and you're still prepping your conference presentation. These kind of things can happen. So as we do just quick things to very quickly get this online, we could just use our existing content is typically the first step. When we're thinking about, especially in an online environment, we want to follow an order of thinking about how we could use content. The first thing to do is think about how we can use existing content, whether that's existing PowerPoint presentations, maybe an existing video that we've created for a different session, existing video that we have found somewhere. If there isn't existing content, some sort of open educational resource, then repurposing existing content would be another step. The last thing we want to do if we're in a hurry is creating our own content, but in some cases, that's just what has to happen. We always want to typically think, how can we use something that exists? Then how can we repurpose something? But then we create our own content when all else fails. Some things to keep in mind, again, focusing the content, less may be more, especially if we think about videos. The chances of students watching a 30-minute video are slim to none. I don't know about you, but if we think about us as faculty, will we watch a 30-minute video? Again, slim to none. An 8-minute video, even less if possible, that's focused, is going to be a better solution. If you have something that's longer, breaking up into 2 shorter videos is also even better. Shorter videos with some sort of practice in between is going to be a better option. We want to keep accessibility in mind. So keep in mind things like captions, making sure our readings are accessible too, sending students off to a website that's not accessible. We want to make sure we're avoiding that. And so I want to make sure that our readings are going to be accessible, that all students can access them. And again, going back to the idea of don't reinvent the wheel if there's something available. We're working quickly through trying to get our instruction put together. And if you have a PowerPoint, this is an opportunity to record a quick video. There are instructions online for how to record a video using a PowerPoint, but it is as simple as just pressing record, and you can record that same slide over and over again until you're ready. But again, shorter is better. If you're looking for a quick solution for how to record a PowerPoint, you can do that within PowerPoint and export it. I actually find it's much easier to just create a Loom, Loom. You can usually I think you can still get free accounts through Loom. What's nice about Loom is that if you share your screen and record it, I just personally have my own personal rule of with Loom, I don't ever re-record. So if I have an or an ah in Loom, it's there. It's for me to be able to record something very quickly, such as a screen recording. I can oftentimes send out a recording of a meeting agenda and then give a brief explanation of the meeting agenda with the idea that, yes, thank you, John, I appreciate that, an explanation of the meeting agenda before I go to a meeting so that we can save a lot of those times. If I always think to myself, is this going to be a good use of Zoom room time? I can record information about meeting agenda and then send that out. And then anyone who watches that Loom of the meeting agenda will then have the information, will know what to focus on for the meeting, and we can potentially even skip items in the meeting agenda. Yep, Panapto also works. John, you're correct. Exactly. And Zoom also works. Yep, so the idea behind these are quick things. If there's an or an ah, you just keep going. But try to keep it as focused and brief as possible. Creating an assignment or two. Want to first think about what your students be able to do at the end of the lesson, and then create an assignment that allows us to be able to assess that. We want to be able to, where do we want students to be by the end, and then how will we know if they got there? Some examples for Spanish might create a Dropbox speaking assignment. Students record a video of themselves speaking on a topic. So I may have a learning objective such as students will be able to tell 3 things they like and 2 things they don't like to do. And so I give a Dropbox speaking assignment, record a video and express 3 things you like and 2 things you don't like, being sure to use the vocabulary that was presented in your textbook. Maybe history discussion forum. Students post a response to a prompt and then comment on 2 other posts. Going back to the example that Shelley put up about what areas of your life do you have a growth or fixed mindset? That's a discussion forum right there. That's a great prompt to get everything started. So something that could be used as a 2-minute or 5-minute breakout room can then be used as your discussion prompt. Maybe in chemistry, brief 10-item quiz about a video. In many cases, our textbooks have a lot of these resources available. So quick steps. And of course, the big thing about for moving into asynchronous instruction is ensuring assignment directions are clear and concise. So my recommendation would be consider including a rubric that will help to communicate the clear expectations. And in Brightspace, we can create a rubric really quickly too. Being clear about where and how to submit, as well as format, file type. If it's an emergency remote teaching experience, we're only gone for a day. Keeping that assignment simple, maybe even low stakes is a good idea. When I've given a Dropbox speaking assignment, for example, it counts as a participation grade as opposed to anything higher stakes. Again, keeping accessibility in mind as well, so that we're ensuring that all students can access it. If we have a discussion forum, making sure that if students are, for example, creating audio files as part of a discussion forum, asking students to then write out the text of what they said in the audio file will help to ensure that we're designing multiple means of representation that our students, in terms of how they're representing what they're presenting as part of their assignment, making sure that everyone can access the information. And of course, big piece of this, it's very easy to forget. Bundle it all into some sort of module in Brightspace, and then unhide when you're ready. I would love to say that did not come from experience, but forgetting to unhide things is not uncommon. So be sure to unhide everything. And that includes with the discussion forum, making sure you unhide the discussion forum in all the places where it needs to be as well. That's also something that can be easily forgotten as well too, or easily overlooked. So the student preview is our friend in this case, if we're in a hurry, trying to make sure if we're going to be out of contact, making sure everything's unhidden. So of course, a big piece of this is communicating it to students as well, is where we can post a Brightspace announcement, including where to find the content, including our due dates. And I'd recommend if you're not going to create a checklist within that Brightspace module, then this announcement is a great place to put a checklist of tasks, one thing after another. So for example, read pages, something to something in your textbook, complete the quiz, then prepare for next in-person class session by doing such and such. And of course, how to contact you with questions, email, discussion forum, etc. An announcement that basically puts everything all together in one place for students to be able to find. So I'm going to pause real quick before moving on to a very quick whistle-stop tour of backward design in a moment. I might ask if any of you had any experience presenting content asynchronously in your discipline in some sort of emergency situation. So in other words, maybe during the COVID-19 lockdown, you chose to go the asynchronous direction as opposed to a synchronous direction. If you had that choice available to you, what are some ways that you present content asynchronously? What have you done that allows you to very quickly present content when time is of the essence? Have you had a reading, a video?
I did a lot of videos of myself.
Mm.
So I did a lot of Panopto videos. I have YouTube videos that students were able to watch, kind of like read, watch, do type of
Yep.
structure. Discussion boards, mastery quizzes. I also did a lot of videos explaining and walking through assignments. Like I'd pull up the assignment and I'd go through kind of what the um, expectations were, to be very transparent. I'd walk through the rubric. So a lot, and I still do that now in my asynchronous courses, but I have a lot of videos. I call them instructional videos, whether it's me going over content information, assignments, or how to do the mastery quizzes. So some of them are very short and sweet, just giving them some guidance. So I do that. Yeah, the read, watch, do I got from Sandy.
Yeah, I like that. I like that. I like that idea of read, watch, do exactly. Yep. Read something, watch a video about it, and
And
then some sort of practice. I like that.
I also actually, well, I did this during COVID. I haven't done it since. Because it was a hard time, right? So I
Yes.
was trying to intrigue the students. So there were some popular songs at the time, like Little Nas X was like the one about riding the horse or something like that. I forget what it's called, but I created, I did a video of myself kind of wrapping that song to APA formatting. So I had little videos like that that I posted that were like kind of funny. And I was hoping, students would find them funny and engaging. So
Yeah.
I never really got any feedback. So who knows if they actually watched them, but I did that to another song too. Where it was about like course content. So that was something I haven't done since, but it was for the time of the
I
pandemic.
like that. I like that. I like that. Well, as you said, it was a difficult time. And
Yeah.
so these types of things where you can bring a little bit of joy to somebody who may have some difficult times going on. I think that's really neat. And um that just sounds like fun. It sounds like it's fun for them, but also sound like it was fun for you too.
Yeah.
Especially seeing this is something that you remember so well too. I like that.
Yeah.
I like that a lot. Teresa says Sandy's favorite online course structure. Read, watch, do. Yep, exactly. I like that. I like that. Shai says, yes, I have also used pre-recorded videos as well as YouTube videos, sometimes a quiz for class discussion. We discuss results, for example, strengths-based assessments. Yep, I like that. Yep, great, excellent, excellent. Text is situation a bit different, referencing external, otherwise prepared content. Even if you have to make modifications, having the base to start from speeds things up a lot. Yes, exactly. Exactly. So this idea of as opposed to reinventing the wheel, either using something that already exists or potentially repurposing something before then moving into creating our own materials. Because just because too, as you saw, it takes a lot of time. It does take a lot of
Yeah.
time, but of course, it's also very rewarding at the same time too to create something that may not exist as well. I love these ideas. These are great. And so we actually kind of at the same time got into a little bit about this idea of activities or assignments you can create an emergency too. So I'm seeing Shelley, for example, putting in strength-based assessments, that types of thing too. So a quiz for class or a discussion. So yeah, lots of different things we can doing in terms of assignments or activities that we're creating for an emergency. So before I move on, any questions, thoughts, concerns? So far, so good. I want to take maybe the next 10 minutes or so, just to very quickly introduce, if you are unaware or not aware of backward design, I thought about different instructional design models that I could be using for this. I settled on backward design and just because it's something that, in the interest of time, can be something we can use in emergency situations where we have to very quickly be able to design instruction, either synchronous or asynchronous instruction in a limited amount of time. But this can also be used when we're designing our instruction for face-to-face instruction. It can also be used when we're designing asynchronous online instruction in a more purposeful manner. Same with synchronous instruction. We can design in a more purposeful way by following backward design. And so it's just a three-stage approach to the instructional design process. And I like to think of it as you start by thinking about where you're going. You consider how you'll know if you get there, and then you plan for how to get there. And so me personally, I'm not a big fan of the name backward design because quite frankly, this is instructional design, in my opinion. These are three steps. This three-step approach really is how instructional design models typically present the instructional design process, is starting with what do you want students to be able to do when they complete instruction? So identifying desired results. I don't like to think of this as doing it backward, although this may be different from how lessons traditionally are thought of. But the idea of thinking about where do you want students to be by the time the lesson is done. So identifying our desired results. Then determining acceptable evidence. So how will we know that our students are able to achieve the objectives? And finally, plan learning experiences and instruction. How do we then know, or how are we then going to get our students to where we want them to be? And so this comes from Understanding by Design, Wiggins and McTighe, and this is something that especially it's quite big and it's quite this is used a lot in promoted quite heavily by ACTFL, our National Language Teaching Organization. I imagine by other organizations as well too. And this is something that can be used for more emergency situations, but also for when we're designing more purposeful too. So just some thoughts. I thought through some different ideas. I collaborated with Gemma, which is by Google, because I don't personally have a lot of experience with sociology, criminal justice, or computer science. So I worked with Gemma. It's a way to run. It's a large language model you can run locally on your computer. And I went back and forth quite a bit, looking to see how we could put together some different lessons, thinking through backward design. So these were created in collaboration with Gemma, just to be fully transparent about that. Thinking about identifying desired results. The objective could be design. We want students to be able to define social norms and analyze deviant behavior and explain how context influences what is considered to be deviant behavior. So if we're thinking about then in a synchronous environment, how we could determine acceptable evidence, it could be that students could create a shared list of social norms in a Google Doc. And so basically I asked Gemma to help me to come up with some learning objectives for the identified desired results. And then I started coming up with assessments and how we could plan the instruction. So we will share a Google Doc. Students will then, a formative assessment, basically create a shared list of social norms together in the synchronous environment, move into breakout rooms in order to create these shared lists of social norms together. And there could be a written assignment in Brightspace, where after class is done, they go home and they work in the asynchronous environment in Brightspace to describe a deviant act that's not illegal. So why is this act deviant then in that case? And then planning learning experiences and instruction. You might use a PowerPoint that exists already to present key concepts, such as things like social norms and deviance. And that's where you then intersperse your activities and assignments, 10 to 15 minutes, and then have your assignments in there. When you think about it from a synchronous perspective, again, criminal justice this time, explain the importance of Miranda rights and when they apply. So some acceptable evidence might be that in breakout rooms, students are going to discuss the importance of Miranda rights, but in a large group chat, students respond if Miranda rights apply to scenarios too. And then we're planning our learning experiences. We present content on Miranda rights, the origin, legal purpose, conditions, etc. But then going through having some worked examples in class. If we want students to be able to respond if Miranda rights apply to scenarios, having some worked examples in the class will be part of how we can have them do that. And then in a large group chat, they can respond about whether or not Miranda rights apply to certain situations. And then we'll want to have discussion questions for breakouts that we're preparing ahead of time as well. And finally, computer science, write a basic loop in Python. So for and with loops, and having students be able to predict the outcome as well too. Like if they're given a certain lines of code, how can then predict the output? So we might ask in chat, it could be that in the large group in the chat, present students with some sample code, and then students can predict what that output is from the sample code. Maybe it's going to be, a series of numbers, for example. Students can work together in breakout rooms to create a loop together, so then they can write the basic loop in Python. And that formative assessment can help them then to build their skills, creating a loop together. Then after class, students will write a basic loop themselves, maybe to print numbers 1 to 5, for example, and then they can submit that to Brightspace. And so the instructor might present what loops do, show syntax examples, provide worked examples that can be answered in the chat, activities and assignments as well, including the assignment in Brightspace that takes place afterwards. And so with 2 minutes to go, we take these same lessons, and then if we look at it just in an emergency situation with asynchronous, if we're thinking about identifying desired results, again, same learning objectives, defining social norms, analyzing deviant behavior, explaining how context influences what's considered deviant. It might be, for example, that we can measure these with a discussion forum, so providing examples of social norms in their own cultures. And maybe there's a written assignment in Brightspace where students will explain a social norm and a deviant behavior that violates that, for example. And as we think about planning the learning experiences and instruction, we have readings and videos to present content. We have to then set up the discussion forum, the assignment Dropbox. And so then being able to put those in a logical order within the asynchronous environment so that when we're giving these assignments quickly, students can have content presented and then some sort of activity or assignment to be able to practice. So again, thinking in these chunks will help to make for an experience that will sustain interest, especially in the asynchronous environment too. Criminal justice, explain the importance of Miranda rights when they apply. Could be that there's a written or a video response where maybe there's a Miranda rights situation or a scenario, I should say, and students have to submit either a written or a video response to whether or not these Miranda rights apply. And maybe a short quiz, multiple choice, true, false, on whether or not these apply to these scenarios. It could be brief video on Miranda rights, something that's found on YouTube, a one-page summary on when Miranda rights are read, maybe something that comes from a course textbook, and then assignment drop boxes and quizzes for the assignments. And for computer science, identifying desired results, write the basic loop in Python, predict the outcome, the output, I should say. There could be a Dropbox assignment to submit code containing a for and while loop, recording a video then as well. When we think about computer science, a lot of times it's easy to find these online, but also AI now. So having a student submit a video walking through with an explanation of the code is also an important piece for academic integrity. And then quiz, predicting the behavior, so read the code, predict the result. This is where we can have tutorial videos on for and while loops, some practice examples, worked examples, and then an assignment Dropbox and a quiz that can be quickly set up as well. So it is 9:50. I'm realizing I'm kind of going over. I'm going to put on the overhead here the link to the Zoom instructions. And so that way, if you haven't had that yet, there is a QR code on this slide right now. The bit.ly link is bit.ly/, and then all caps OSW-ZOOM-ERT. And that information will be there so you can follow the Zoom instructions if you want to set up a quick Zoom session, and be able to then, there's instruction on how to email that to your students too at the end. And I'll leave this up on the shared screen for just a moment, but as we get to the end, are there any questions or anything that I can answer before we finish up? Thank you, Shelley. Very nice to meet you and work with you. All right, well,
Okay,
I'd like to just say thank you.
thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
I'll stop the recording.